Palestinian leaders vow to continue efforts to bring Israel to the International Criminal Court as the U.S. threatens to sanction the court and closes Palestine's mission in Washington. So, could this reignite tension in the region? And can the U.S. still act as a peace broker? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hoda Abdel-Hamid. The U.S. government has announced it's closing the diplomatic mission of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Washington. National Security Advisor John Bolton delivered the news during a speech on Monday. He also threatened to arrest and prosecute judges of the International Criminal Court should they proceed to prosecute American citizens or Israel. Palestinians have long sought justice at the ICC for the Israeli occupation.
The Trump administration will not keep the office open when the Palestinians refuse to take steps to start direct and meaningful negotiations with Israel. The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC.
Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat has accused the Trump administration of doing Israel's bidding by allowing more illegal settlements and cutting desperately needed aid to Palestinians. Here's some of what he had to say.
The Trump administration wants to dismantle the international order to ensure that it can stay above the laws and escape accountability. If the U.S. is that much against the International Criminal Court, why did the U.S. lead the Security Council on trying to bring President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan to the International Criminal Court? Why did it support all the applications against African leaders on the International Criminal Court? I'm not going to speak about double standards. I'm not going to go to the issue of racism. I leave it to your thinking.
The U.S. is not only piling pressure on the PLO, but the actions it's taking may also affect final status negotiations with Israel. Let's take a look at these. Bolton became the first American official to refer to illegal Israeli settlements as housing projects. While the U.S. has frozen $25 million in funding for Palestinian hospitals, last month, it also cut funding to the UN agency that helps Palestinian refugees. And it also axed $200 million in aid to Gaza and the occupied West Bank. And the PLO says the U.S. is no longer an honest broker in talks after it moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem earlier this year. So let's bring in our panel for today. Joining us in Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. In West Jerusalem, Alon Liel, former Israeli diplomat. He was also the Director General of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And in Washington, Khalil Jahshan, Executive Director of the Arab Institute, Washington, D.C. A warm welcome to you all. Mustafa, let me start with you. Now the Palestinians have also lost their voice in Washington. It keeps on getting from bad to worse.
We didn't lose anything. I think the United States has lost its ability to be a mediator in any peace process. It has lost any ability to be impartial, and it has shown the decisions of Mr. Trump and his administration has shown that there is no difference whatsoever between Israeli policy and this administration's policy. On the contrary, I think his action against the PLO office looks like they are receiving instructions from Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. And it is also a reflection of this alliance between the most extreme, most reactionary neoconservatives in the United States and the Israeli Zionist movement, which is, of course, going to reflect in a very dangerous manner considering these actions. What the United States administration did is an effort to exercise pressure on us as Palestinians to give up our rights, to give up our right for freedom, for independence, for our national rights, and that will never happen. We will never accept to surrender. We will never accept the so-called the deal of the century, which is nothing but about liquidating the Palestinian rights, including our rights in Jerusalem, our rights for an independent state, our rights for having Palestinian refugees, and we will never surrender to this pressure.
Okay, Khalil, you're in Washington. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise that this was going to happen. Not only the Trump administration, but several U.S. administrations before that had threatened to close down the mission. Now that it's happened, how was the news perceived?
You're right that this is not the first time. I mean, the issue of PLO presence here has never been normalized. The U.S. has allowed a presence, a diplomatic presence. Way back, it used to be under the auspices of the League of Arab States. Then it became independent under a Palestinian entity. However, it was never recognized fully as a diplomatic entity and continued to be blackmailed. Recently, definitely, it hasn't been a surprise, considering the calls and lobbying within Congress to try to use it as another leverage point to blackmail the Palestinians. Taken on its own, frankly, it's just a symbolic gesture with very limited political significance. However, when you fit it in with the events of the past 9 months and the steps undertaken by the administration, starting with Jerusalem earlier in the year or late last year, the refugee issue, UNRWA, the hospitals, the inability to deal with the issue of two states or recognize the two-state solution, when you fit it together with all of that, it becomes basically an obscene and unadulterated form of blackmail to force the Palestinians to accept an American diktat.
Well, Alon, I'm supposing that where you are, the news was well received, at least in some quarters. But could you please explain to us what's the thinking behind it? What's the benefit for Israel to have one step after the other taken by the Trump administration? I mean, we've seen this total support by Prime Minister Netanyahu for President Donald Trump, a lot of, let's say, favors towards him. But do you agree with Mustafa that maybe Trump is listening a bit too much to Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I can agree that he was listening to Prime Minister Netanyahu when the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was concerned. Definitely big joy in Israel of the Israeli government. I'm not sure at all the cutting of the money, especially to hospitals in East Jerusalem, is causing joy in Israel. And I'm not sure at all, I'm guessing because here it's holiday, nobody is reacting yet officially, but I'm not sure at all the closing of the mission in Washington will cause a lot of joy, because this is the last stick the Americans are having, or but the last civilian stick. They can come to the point of bombarding in Ramallah, but I don't think they will do this. But the last meaningful diplomatic civilian stick that they had was closing the mission. And this is in fact an announcement by Washington that they gave up on mediating. And I think the Israelis would not like this, because for the Israelis to have the possibility of the Americans mediating hanging there was good, because nobody is stepping in while the Americans are working on the deal of the century. Now, in fact, the closing of the embassy says, we will not work on the deal of the century. You cannot work on mediating when you kick out the diplomats of one of the sides from Washington. So this can bring in the Europeans and Russians and China and others to be more interested in peacemaking, and I don't think Israel will like it.
So, Alon, do you actually, from what you're saying, I have a feeling that you're trying to explain that both sides have not really thought through all these steps? I'm talking about Israel and Washington, in the sense that all these decisions were taken one after the other since the end of last year, but no one is thinking long term?
No, I think there is a difference between Israel and the United States and Jerusalem and Washington on the issue of the wish to have a deal. I think Israel doesn't want a deal, doesn't want an agreement with the Palestinians. I really think that President Trump and the people around him wanted a deal. They wanted a very pro-Israeli deal, but they thought they could impose such a deal. And once they saw that they cannot impose a deal, they are gradually giving up. And I don't think this was the initial American plan. There were threats all the time to close the mission in Washington, but I don't think they really wished to do it. But they were pushed into a corner when they could not ignite talks, that they had to do it.
So, Mustafa, the Palestinians have been put under a lot of pressure. Some would even say that they have been bullied. Just repeating the words used by several senior Palestinian officials. What's next for you guys? And I mean, Palestinian leaders have always said that Israel is not interested in peace. Israel has said the opposite, but it's the Palestinians who are paying the highest price. What can you do? What margin of maneuver do you have at this stage?
It's very strange to say that Palestinians don't want peace. I mean, who in the Palestinian people would like to stay under Israeli military occupation, which has become the longest occupation in modern history, 51 years? Which Palestinian refugee would want to stay a refugee instead of having the ability and the possibility of coming back to the homeland he was born in or his father was born in? It's just a big propaganda mistake to claim that Palestinians don't want peace. The people that want peace more than anybody else in this world are the Palestinians, who suffered, as you said, more than anybody else, who are suffering today from the theft of our land, from the displacement, from the ethnic cleansing, which is taking place now in Khan al-Ahmar and in other places, who are suffering from having 7,000 prisoners in Israeli jails. But I think your Israeli guest has just confirmed what I said. He's just confirmed that practically Mr. Trump and his administration are receiving their instructions from Mr. Netanyahu. Yes, Trump wanted the deal of the century to be in favor of Israel and denying us the right even to negotiate about Jerusalem, the right even to talk about the issue of refugees. But Netanyahu doesn't want any deal at all. He does not want even any negotiations. Netanyahu wants to implement the American deal on the ground practically, and that is exactly what Israel is doing in terms of settlement building and so on. So I think the whole issue about the deal of the century was nothing but advancing Israeli approach, and then going as far as they could. They knew exactly that no Palestinian leader would ever accept surrendering Jerusalem, and they used all of that to kill any possibility for a peace process. But one very important point here is that this action of the American side is happening exactly on the anniversary of the 25th anniversary of the Oslo Agreement. In my opinion, the American closure of the PLO office is a declaration from Israel and the United States that Oslo is dead. And that is the end of the road. The end of the road of a wrong agreement where Palestinians agreed on things they should not have agreed about. At least they should have demanded a full and complete cessation of all settlement activities and a recognition of the right of the Palestinians to have a state of their own. This did not happen. Now we are at the end of that road, and we need to choose a different alternative road, and we can do it. Nobody can blackmail us to surrender and give up our rights. This is not going to happen. And in my opinion, this American position reflects an isolation of American diplomacy. Look, the United States is in trouble today with Canada, in trouble today with Russia, with China, with the Europeans, with the United Nations, with international law, and now they want even to have trouble with the International Criminal Court, just because the International Criminal Court might criticize Israel for the crimes it has committed.
Well, Khalil, we're going to get back to the Oslo Accords in a few minutes, but I just wanted to ask Khalil, I mean, we have been talking about this ultimate deal for quite a while. President Trump certainly repeated it more than once, but no one knows the details, maybe a few officials in Washington and in Israel, but apart from that, very little has leaked. So was there really an ultimate deal in your view? Or was the Trump administration cobbling together something as it went along? Because it's very difficult to understand what's the aim of all of this.
Technically and officially, there is no such thing as the ultimate deal. Frankly, it's a figment of someone's imagination at the White House. They have been talking about it even before they arrived at the White House. If you remember, during the campaign, they began to talk about an ultimate deal for peace in the Middle East that Trump expressed as a candidate, his desire to work out and to mediate. However, in practical terms, when you look at Washington, for those of us who live here and who are familiar with previous negotiations attempts in the past for decades, there is always a team that's put together, whether it's at the White House or at the State Department, particularly at the State Department, that works for years in preparation for such talks. No such team has been put together other than 2 or 3 people that have been basically managing a rehash of ideas that they inherited from, I wouldn't even say from Israel, but or the Netanyahu government. They inherited from the most radical elements, anti-peace elements in Israel. And going back to what Alon said, I think I understand where he's coming from. There is a discrepancy between the intentions of Washington and the intentions of the Netanyahu government. Netanyahu doesn't want peace, but at least this administration has talked about the possibility. But in practical terms, nothing has happened. In practical terms, it was a diktat. In practical terms, it was ideas that do not meet the minimum requirements, the minimum aspirations of the Palestinian people, whether it's the two-state solution, whether it's the end of occupation. This administration, in spite of its declared objective of wanting to do a comprehensive and lasting peace, as it did yesterday. For God's sake, the statement yesterday announcing the closure of the office by the State Department declared that this is not a retreat. I'm quoting, this is not a retreat by this administration from its commitment to comprehensive and lasting peace. If that's not a retreat, I don't know what a retreat is.
Well, going back to that statement by the National Security Advisor John Bolton yesterday on Monday, it was quite clear that the decision to close down the PLO's mission at this particular point was somehow linked to the steps taken by the Palestinians at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Now, Alon, could you explain to us why is Israel so keen on shielding itself from the ICC when at the same time it considers it's never done anything wrong?
First, it's 9/11, I think, today, and when thinking about the closure of the mission, it's really the 9/11 of the peace process. It's the end of the peace process, and it was not done on the Oslo day, that is 13th of September, but it was done on the 11th of September, and I don't know if intentionally they chose the 9/11, but it so happened. Regarding the deal of the century, before I come to the ICC, it is unbelievable that an unexperienced president in diplomatic affairs took 3 people, all Jewish, totally unexperienced in diplomatic affairs, and asked them to do the deal of the century. I think the intention was, like in business, to give them a deal they cannot refuse, with the rifle headed toward them. And I think only gradually this team and the president understood that the Palestinians are not on their own in this world, and in order to have a deal, you have to talk with them. And the moment you could not bring them to the table, the whole thing collapsed. So the assumption that you can go on, torture the Palestinians, and they will come to the table, this was the big mistake. Not that they didn't want to make something. They didn't know how to do it. They were totally ignorant when it comes to Middle Eastern diplomacy. Regarding ICC, I think this is an excuse. I think the issue of the Palestinians' claims to ICC is not what brought about the closure of the embassy and the financial punishments. It's all the fact that Abu Mazen was courageous enough, I would say, toward Washington to say no. And the Americans, like children, they were insulted that Abu Mazen, who is nothing, who doesn't have a state, who doesn't have an economy, who doesn't have an army, is saying no to the only superpower in the world. I think this was the only factor. And they behaved as insulted children, using one stick after the other until they finished the sticks. And let's see what will happen now. I don't think the problems the United States, as United States, is having with ICC is another matter. But I think the fact that the Palestinians are approaching international legal bodies is happening all the time. I don't think this was the reason for closing the mission.
Well, and the Palestinian leadership does say that it will continue with its bidding with several international organizations. Now, Mustafa, briefly, we're reaching the end of the show. I mean, Oslo dead is something you hear a lot in the streets of Ramallah or anywhere you go in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, and some people would tell you it is a good thing. Now, if the U.S. is not anymore an honest broker, is it now maybe the silver lining, a golden opportunity for the Palestinians to rethink their whole approach on how to end the occupation, to bring in more people, or to do it completely different, scrap this and start again?
Actually, it's not only a golden opportunity, it's a duty. It's our duty to create and use an alternative strategy using popular nonviolent resistance, as we do today in Khan al-Ahmar and in many other places, using boycott, divestment sanctions in the same manner that it was used against the apartheid system in South Africa, especially that Israel has created a much worse apartheid today, and using international arena and international law to besiege this Israeli occupation and this system of apartheid. And to stop waiting for the United States to provide a solution. But I want just to say one point about the deal of the century. The main goal was to have Palestinians sit at a table while their issues are liquidated, like Jerusalem refugees, etc., and while Israel would normalize relationship with the Arab countries. That's what we Palestinians courageously obstructed. And that's why Mr. Trump is mad. It's not just a childish behavior. It's because we failed them. We stopped their plan to normalize relations with Israel at our expense.
Okay, and thank you. I'm going to bring in Khalil, but we have less than a minute left. So Mustafa says the deal was basically jeopardized. Do you agree with him that it all backfired in the face of the Trump administration? And what options are they available now, or are they any?
I do agree that the deal has collapsed, and basically this is the reason for this vengeful attitude on the part of staff at the White House against the Palestinians. What they are trying to do domestically, I think, is trying to put the blame totally on the Palestinian side for the failure of this project that they have been propagating, since their arrival at the White House, particularly to their immediate constituency in this regard, which is the extreme right-wing evangelical movement, that doesn't believe in
Putting
peace
the
and are
blame
willing
on
to continue.
Palestinians is something that several U.S. administrations have done. I'm sorry, Khalil, but we have reached the end of the show. So thank you, everyone, Mustafa Barghouti, Alon, Liel, and Khalil Jahshan. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hoda Abdel-Hamid, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.